Right, so everybody's ready to go again. So we we move on to how this brood evolved. So you've got in the first session, you've got how we thought about it, how we put it together, some of the problems that we had, and there were heaps of problems. Now the way of sorting the problems out is embryo transfer. Embryo transfer is for two main purposes. Exploding a population is what most people use it for. What we used it for was to explode the population, but also improve the population very quickly through the use of embryo transfer. So that's your top end of your genetics coming in all the time and not using the lower end. From 2010, the Australian white breed was basically out of embryo transfer. So none of the females had lambed, none of the males had ever served a ewe. So all the males that we've used in this time have been used with electroejaculation, which is pretty unique. So there's never been any contact in the early stages between a male and a female except through embryo transfer work. Some people that might frighten and think that you're going to end up with an animal that doesn't breed and you might have infertility problems or whatever. None of that's raised its head at all. Literally thousands of embryos were transferred. Days and days and days, or said there dozens of programs. As we go through some of these slides, and I've got to look at them because I did this the other day and it's pretty hard to talk if there's nothing up there. All lambed through sheds. The reason for that was not for dystocia, lambing problems. It was simply if you've got 500 lambs coming in 3 or 4 days that use lambing, doesn't matter what brood you use, you'll get a lot of mismothering. So as a lamb or a ewe was looking like lambing or had dropped a lamb, she's put into an individual pen. I think there's a photograph of one of our other sheds that runs as a lambing shed, nothing else. And through that period, that's the one area that I didn't have much involved. Stop smiling, Ross. I didn't have much involvement in that. The workload there was Martin, James and Ross. And that's 24-hour watch, and simply so that we get the pedigrees right. So we can't make a decision on how to tweak this breed one way or another if our pedigree is not correct. And I would suggest that our pedigrees would be about 98 or 9% correct, because of the work that the three blokes in particular did. 24-hour shifts, up every 2 hours. I didn't do any of that. Oh, I might have done one night, I think. No, apparently not. Yeah, that was the 2% that's wrong. Lambing through sheds, very large culling rates. So we just cut the heads off everything that didn't tick the box because we didn't want to breed out of those sheep. Because if we had, we might get one unique animal come out that's a hybrid and think, oh, we better use that. So the culling rates are very high. And hundreds of hours on selections. I did have some input on that, although that's a contentious issue as well. But selection that's where you're honing things, that's where you're getting it right. So that's sort of an overview. It was to explode the population, but also hone it to get it where we wanted it to be. So on the photos there, that's a very young Ross with Pete Lynch flushing when he had some here. On the other side is those little red bumps called, I better get this right, corpus luteum. So CL. So each one of those will release an egg. So with superovulation, which are the drugs that are given to the animals for, before they're AI'd, to get more ovulations. So normally you'd have one, maybe two horns of the uterus. With the superovulation, that's a good one. You get plenty that aren't good. So we work on averages. When people tell you what they're doing on flushing averages, they're normally working on a few sheep. When we give averages on it, it's over 100 sheep done over 3 or 4 days. So that's what those little bumps are. The one on the left-hand side is actually, that's not an Australian white, that was another breed. It was the only one that I could get that Ross did all the work in the shed, or tells me did, that's the only photograph on it. There's a lot of other people in there, but I couldn't find the others, so there, that one. Right, Craig. So I'm going to go through a few people. That were important. He was number one. Programmed every year. Both donors and ETs, for the ET and the recipients. He was in charge of all of Hammy, all selection. It was Mr. Australian White. We better change our role. The other key going. We get on to these other fellas, it's easier. Yeah. So,
I the next slide better. Oh,
Ross.
Jeez,
Yeah, so Ross was important. He spent most of the time running the shed, even though I had to be on his back all the time to make sure it was done right. So he was the bloke in the shed working with Pete, holding the dish, and he just he grew into a man through doing that. He was Martin's right-hand man. I've got to stop talking about Martin because this breaks me up. So he was heavily involved in selection and development. In particular, Ross did a lot of work on the shedding and the feet. So because we had Dorpers, we bought a Peak Hill rotator to trim feet on Dorper feet, and it was pretty handy to do selection on Australian white feet. So Ross and I'd go through the sheet, flip everything over, look at the feet, and when we first started, you'd have a pile of toenails like that beside you after doing a few hundred sheep, and your arm would be completely buggered from trimming. We had air secators as well to make it easier to knock the real rough stuff off. So what we would do is all those sheep would get culled that weren't any good, and then we'd put the ones that had the right feet. So we're looking for that depth of heel, and there'll be a photograph somewhere where I'll really point that out. So both that and shedding were the two things, and one of the rams that Ross fell in love with pretty early, and you remember his number, that where the shedding really kicked in? Oh, 51 was shedding, but the 183, 368's father, that was one line that just all of a sudden they started shedding out of the shoulder, and that was that one line that did it. There wasn't really any other line, and then out of that one line we expanded. So Ross in particular had a lot of input into that. So we can go again. I forget who else I put in there.
Is that photo taken when he was in school, Graham?
Oh, just out of school. Oh, sorry. I didn't. Sorry, no, there's no, go forward.
What?
You're
not saying anybody else?
No, we'll just. I just.
James, you want to say it?
That wasn't meant to be in there. Oh. It took a while. I had to think about it. So I just put a question mark down because even though James tells me how important he was actually involved in all aspects. Whilst he spends more time with the Dorsets and now Angus cattle, which is every second word, he was involved in everything all the way through too, as I was, Ross, Martin, and probably the next bloke that had as much impact into selection. I think would be Pete Lynch, because he was there for every program as well. So apart from the three of us and Martin, Pete was the one that was there for every bit of it. So yeah, James did have some impact. Yeah.
Finish with James.
Oh, Pete. So we refer to Pete as the father of the breed, the sheep shagger from New Zealand. Tireless efforts. Tireless. He would be on his feet for 12, 14 hours a day flushing, from dawn till dark, and sometimes after dark, and never a foul word. Maybe that might be... Is that how you spell foul? I told you what's the spelling, right? An official snake catcher. Pete's got a phobia about snakes, so there was one funny one when he came in and on his stand that's beside him as we'd frozen a little snake about that long and had him sitting up like this, where there were a lot of foul words. And another time when there was a dead one wrapped around the oxygen bottle, and that was also quite funny. So yeah, Pete, thanks for all the work, mate. Lindsay Chitty. Lindsay's not here today, but he started as our embryologist. He was actually a part owner of animal breeding services at that stage. Lindsay was responsible for the way the sheds run, where we try and do everything the best that we possibly can. So if you didn't wipe the belly on the sheep the right way, at the right angle, at the right time, Lindsay'd come out and rip your head off. So everybody was happy that he got all that side going. So he basically trained everyone in the shed that we've passed on to everybody else. And we really thank Lindsay for the work that he's put into it as well. Huh. Kirsty. This one's, well, she keeps the team going. She's got this going, she keeps picking everyone up when they're not doing the right thing, and just keeps the whole thing going. So that's everything from food to the record keeping, and I'll go through some of the things that she's actually designed for us, that we can do selections now on our phones, on pedigrees. First aid, she's administering first aid there to Pete at that stage. Whilst I was telling him his arms weren't broken, and just stick him in some ice, you'll be right, both arms were broken. But he did keep AIing that morning and the next one with 2 casts. So computer programs pedigree analysis, so we can go back quickly on our phones, or go back to the computer and look up and see what is in the background of all these animals, so we know where we're going. So that's sort of the team. Yeah, next one. That made a massive difference to how it works. So if you take one person out of that team, it wouldn't be as good as what it is now. So to give you some idea of, and this will look all mumbo jumbo, but to give some idea of how much detail we went into in this breed is these next couple of slides, and I'll try and go through them in a little bit of detail as to how the breed now revolves around particular animals. This breed, most breeds revolve around males. This breed actually revolves around females. Through the use of embryo transfer and exploding the population, the females have had more impact than the males. And in particular, the U140134, she was out of one flush. If we just, no, we'll stay there. There's another, the next one that'll explain a bit more. But all those ewes there are out of one flush, 134, 147. Those 2 ewes, we had a photograph from Adelaide show. Those were the 2 ewes in the show. Only once did the 134 have a champion ribbon on it. The other one had 3 or 4 championships. And then we had 146 that was actually born as a twin of 147, and 55, that's meant to be 56 I think, they were actually twins. So to show you the difference in how you're honing a breed and using embryo transfer work to the absolute max, 134 was flushed 10 times from 2015 to 18, and I think Simon might have flushed her the last time and said don't bring her back. So she has never lambed. She's sitting up here now. The only thing is that we have to keep her away from rams. She was over 3-year-old when we first got her in lamb, and she didn't die late. So it's the only, apart from one cow I think we've done, it's the only caesarean that we've ever done on the farm, and that was to save her life. We lost the lamb, but we saved the ewe. So over that period she had 78 lambs tagged as born, and I don't know how many of those 78 actually lived or were kept in the stud. She was flushed 10 times to 9 different rams, so we used one ram twice. She has 1,069, I think it is, descendants to the 4th generation, so she's back She's in 1,000 pedigrees that we've got now. She's in there between the first to the fourth generation. The other ewe that actually beat her in the show ring most of the time, 147, she was flushed 9 times. The thing about 134 is she flushed extremely well all the time as well, gave large numbers. 147, 9 times to 7 different rams, had 28 lambs, and she's got a 504 descendants to the fourth generation. She hasn't had the same impact, basically being flushed or 9 times versus 10. The other ewes had far more impact on the breed, but they're embryo sisters out of the one flush. 146, flushed 7 times, 28 lambs, but there's only 68 descendants. So obviously her progeny, and most of these rams were common rams that were joined to these ewes. 146 has only got 68 descendants to the fourth generation. 55 and 56, 55 9 times, so she didn't flush as well. And 56 descendants, the other one's got 17. So even within that group of ewes that were all out of one ewe by one ram, out of one flush, there was one particular animal that was far superior to the rest. And that's the beauty of the embryo transfer, to hone your breed and turn it into a particular type. Ardeen actually bought the ram that was one of the brothers, and he's had a big influence. He was the sire of 53, wasn't he? Sire of Luda, sorry. He's by 53 and he's the sire of Luda, which he's the sire of this ram here, the $38,000 ram. So it's had, 134's had quite a number of sons and grandsons that have been used in the stud and had a very big influence. She sheds beautifully, she's got great carcass shape, balance, she still looks, you could walk around to the show ring tomorrow and she's just running in the paddock. We've actually got her on display with one of her daughters that looks basically the same as her, but this is basically to show you we had 5 full sisters, 190 lambs born, and the one female has dominated all the rest. She's the dominant sheep in the Australian white breed. So if we go to the next slide. Right, the mother of that ewe was flushed 4 times to 4 different rams, had 22 lambs, and she's in 3,370 descendants in our lambing records. So you're seeing that the breed's pretty tight. When people come to me and they say, I want a different bloodline, I can say, yeah, well, you can have a different bloodline, but they're all the same. It's out of a tight genetic pool, not a wide genetic pool. So if I was doing this with some of the modern geneticists, we should have 3 heads and 5 or 6 legs through being this tight. But if you haven't got the genetic problem there, it doesn't come out. If it's there, it'll come out. So another example, she was a twin to 126067. She had 7 lambs born from one flush, but there's only 8 descendants in the whole thing. And the reason being, when I did a bit of checking on that, she didn't breed very well. The other ewe bred magnificently, and her twin sister didn't breed well. So it's not necessarily that if breeding's identical, it's going to come up with the same thing. You get variations. The alleles don't, or genetically they don't match up the same every time. So the analogy to that is Lotto, Powerball, same numbers in there every time, but they very seldom fall the same way, and that's the same in breeding. Okay, so this is what Kirsty pulled off and developed this, that we can pull this up on our phones, anywhere in the paddock, from where it is, we can pull all this information back up. So I did a talk at the Australian White Symposium a month ago and talked about how we breed animals, and it's now seen as controversial that we line breed, where most animals in the world were line bred, and now it's controversial if you do what works. You're better to do this hybridising, crossing here and there, and you get licorice all sorts. And we're after Jaffas. We're after the same thing and just making the Jaffa better, rather than trying to find these outstanding individuals that don't breed. Now, the reason I put that one up, I'm think that's actually the champion ram from Sydney. We've got an inbreeding coefficient of 6.2%, which is bugger all. To get a high inbreeding coefficient, you've got to be father over daughter for several generations. That'd be right, Aduli, to get that up. That wouldn't worry us. And looking through our pedigrees, about as high as I could find was 30-odd%. Most of our pedigrees are between about 3 or 4% and 10 or 12. That's about it on an inbreeding coefficient. So in that pedigree there, you've got the U134 is back on the third generation. She'd probably come back in somewhere else. 134, the ram that's in there, 13134 was actually not related to her at all. It's just the same tag number, 1 year apart. So in this one, I wanted to actually point out that with the embryo transfer, when we started going through this ram, I believe, is quite an outstanding individual, 204, and we call him Ruger, which Ruger developed the calibre 204, so that's why he's called Ruger. This fellow is Trump, 124, this is 488, so this bloke didn't get champion anyway. I think he got a reserve somewhere, Sydney. That bloke was champion at Dubbo. This ram was never shown. That ram there was $27,000 ram, magnificent shedding. And then we moved through some of the other sides in here. That one there's went to China, or actually he never got to China, but he was used in flushing programs, and his semen went to China. This ram here in particular was champion at Sydney, 191, and I was talking to Ross about him this morning. Magnificent sheep. There's only one problem. Even though he was champion at Sydney in 2013, I think it was. 13. What is he? 11, yeah, would have been 13. He didn't shed. Great carcass, everything looked right. You could shear him and he looked good at the show. And it was important that he was at the show because he looked so good, but we had to be very careful on this. So this ram in particular had Dorset genetics in it. That's why his carcass was right. So when we kept a son of that ram, we made sure that we were keeping the right type. So here he is again, he's up in here, and then he's down in here again. And this ram here, 130134, was a magnificent shedding sheep. Wonderful temperament. He actually went around some of the shows that we had, and I think at Murray Bateman, you might remember Josh. Remember the ram at Murray Bateman that was so quiet, and at 53? 53. Carcass, breed type. There'll be a photograph of that ram tonight round the wall with Shuna Chen, $14,000 to China. 191 I've already mentioned there that he didn't shed, but a magnificent carcass, great sheep. What's that one there? 28. That was one Ross didn't want to use because he didn't have things right, but we had to use sheep that didn't have things right to get to the next level. So that ram probably didn't have much impact in the breed at all. 191 again, 24. Now, I mentioned that ram earlier today. That ram went to China to Shuna Chen and his problem, Ross? Yeah, like up to 14%. So that was in there. So there's problems in there everywhere. That ram there, 9152, 9 denotes. So well, we'll go backwards there on when we started the tagging. We had a white tag, a black tag, a red tag, a blue tag, an orange tag. And they were all numerical order, 1 to whatever. When we started registrations for export, there isn't any program that allows you to be blue 1, red 1, and even when it came to writing these down in the ET shed, was that a red or a blue? We'd get it down to the house and it was an orange and it wasn't a red and it wasn't a blue, so you could make mistakes. So we actually put a number on it. So the year is the first two numbers, and if it was an 8, it was a blue tag. If it was a 9, it was a red tag, and if it was stabilised at orange, we called it 6. And then once we got past that, we wiped all that out, and it's just a number because they all became stabilised. So that ram there was only was an F2 at that level. And 52 was the first reserve champion ram at Sydney Royal. So in that, what I'm trying to explain is the genetic makeup of that animal, for us, is knowing each one of those rams and how they will breed and what they did breed, and how the likelihood of this animal here, of him breeding what he looks, is only if you get all this right. And if we go back far enough and we go back into these generations, a lot of them are very, very common ancestors. I know. Yeah, no, you're not going to be able to see this, but this is the program that Kirsty's got in for us. So if I can go in, it's 134, which is the ewe over here, and that's her lambs. So you'd see a block of lambs like that where they're all the same inbreeding coefficient. They're all by different rams. That's the inbreeding coefficient. That's the lambs that were born, male or female. Whether they're born as twins or singles didn't really matter, because it was all embryo transfers, so we weren't too concerned on that side. But that gives us the ability to go straight in and find all those animals if we need to. And there has been times when we've had superior animals that we've gone looking for their siblings to make sure that their siblings don't exhibit different traits to what they've got. Even if we don't keep them, if we can find them and look at them, then in our own computer, the brain, we know whether or not that animal will reproduce what it has. So we're talking this, Jason, this is where it comes in. Over, from 2011 and 12, over 500 ewes, donor ewes, were used in embryo transfer. That was easy to find because Pete did a program and at the bottom of it said 497 ewes. I didn't even think about trying to work out the flushing programs from then on, from 2013 to 17. That's when it really took off, because we had more numbers, more selection, we were getting better individual animals to use. We were concentrating on this, the three issues was shedding, black feet and carcass shape. They were the main drivers. They're the things we've got to have right. If we've got a shedding breed, it has to shed, and it wasn't shedding well enough early. We needed the black feet, and we definitely need carcass shape. So getting that brood tight means they all look the same, like a flock of birds or a school of fish, ants, bees, whatever you like. We wanted them to look like that. We don't agree with the idea that you need variation in your population to improve. There's always the genetic variations there if you've got enough numbers. But the idea that you need to pull everything from all different breeds to get into one breed, we don't agree with that at all, and we don't understand why it's seen as controversial. We don't do it in our Dorsets, we don't do it in Australian Whites or any of the other breeds we've had, or the cattle we've got. We keep them tight so that we get consistency. This was probably the biggest day that we did, and it's not coming up very clear, but that was the team that ran through 1,339 embryos transferred over a 6-day period, at an average of about 5.5 embryos per ewe. Now those ewes were all maiden ewes, they'd never lambed, and it just worked smoothly. That was a huge program, huge. Apologies on the quality of that, I had to pull it off of Facebook. That was probably one of the days out of that, I think, but that particular day we averaged 9, thought we'd really nailed it. We averaged 9 on one day, but on 6 days we averaged 5.5. Yeah. That was a line of views out of that big program. They mostly finished up in China. We obviously kept the best ourselves, and the rest went to China. But you can see the uniformity. There was close on 400 ewes in that mob, which it doesn't look like that unless there's a few around the corner. But we were starting to get it right at that stage where they all had, as young sheep, they were born with hair, so nothing being born with that wool type. There was a consistency in their heads and the shape of their heads and the coloration of the pigment on the nose, on their backsides. And yeah, it was really starting to come together at that stage. And I think they were 2000 and, well, it was out of that big program, so they were all late born lambs. All right, that comes to the end of that one. I didn't know we were going to. So, basically, I'd like questions now on anyone that's got any questions on the use of the embryo transfer. I had Steve Lisk, who's a commercial breeder, asked me whether there was any use for him as a commercial producer in using embryo transfer, and I just said quite clearly no. It's an expensive operation. It's not always successful in the numbers you get. And we've got people sitting around here that have had really good results and ordinary results like we've had. I wouldn't suggest that it's of any use to anyone. What I would suggest is that if you're looking to buy commercial rams or stud animals, that you're going to someone that's doing some embryo transfer work trying to improve the quality of their animals. And we've seen, like when I sit around and see a lot of different stud breeders here that have been using embryo transfer, they're all breeding some outstanding sheep and good lines. That will slow down as it progresses. At the moment, most of our embryo work is not on anything other than quality for the breed type, and now when we're testing for eating quality, that we're actually trying to get a handle on that, and this is where a dooley will come in after lunch. We're trying to get a handle on where the eating quality sits. So we're doing testing on animals and then we're flushing them to see if those traits are being passed on to the next generation. So that's where our embryo transfer work is sitting now. Oh, well, if they are, we're getting it right, but that's in the future. That's the one thing on the eating quality side. We've got a fair idea what it is, where it is, and what's making this eating quality. We didn't know about it early, but we certainly know about it now. There's a lot of talk about the Australian White being the Wagyu of the sheep world. That's something that we've used it a little bit ourselves, but others started talking about it early, and I believe it relates more to the melting point of the fat rather than IMF. So the fat melting at a low point. Now, it's not in every animal. It's certainly not in animals that'll be crossed with other breeds. You can lose it quickly. On some of the testing we've been doing, we tested F2s out of a commercial operation for a start, and we found significant differences there to normal sheep. And then we tested purebreds, and there was a significant difference between an F2 and a purebred, which made sense. So if the purebred's melting at a lower point, the F2 was a little bit higher, but it was still miles in front of whatever else we were testing.
So Graham, one question in that is, and we haven't even talked about this at all, but will the embryo transfer be good for, part of where I see this breed going to is we cover a massive range of environments, rainfall, grazing conditions, all that sort of stuff. You see it really working to be able to tailor a breed around, tailor a certain rainfall or a certain area rather than, like what I'm saying, it might be, it's cold here, or it could be in, North Queensland where it's, where it's hotter or drier and all that. So,
right, well, in designing the breed, most people get the idea that if you want to stay cool, you don't want wool on because it's an insulator, or you want to stay warm, you put wool on to keep warm as well. You think of it more to keep warm than to keep cool, but it will actually, the right wool will keep you cool as well. The Australian White is a hollow fibre, medullated fibre, so it's hollow. So it's got no tensile strength, it breaks like a piece of chalk, but that means that it keeps you warm in cold conditions, but it also keeps you cool in hot conditions. So what we're finding is the same animal in Longreach in Queensland at 45 degrees has a very short hair coat. That same animal going into Inner Mongolia has a thick hair coat. So the animals you're seeing here today that we'll go through later, they're thick in the coat because it's cooling off. If you come here in winter, and in the summertime they'd be short in the coat. If I move them to our other property in near Wagga at Tarcutta, they're much shorter in the coat. Same animal, just different climatic conditions. So they're going into a lot of different areas. I said minus 35 in Inner Mongolia. Costa Rica is tropical. They're in there and doing well. Fiji, Pete Lynch has been using semen over the Fiji, fantastic in Tonga. Just recently with Pete Tonga, yeah. So they're going into all different environments. I don't know that it's not like a superfine sheep's got to be on a certain type of soil and the strong walls on a different one. This breed seems to survive on most conditions. So some things that we are hearing from clients is that they don't like a straight, loosened pasture. They've got to put something else in to get them to go. But then others are not saying that. We find on straight, loosened silage, they do like steam. So I don't see why loosened would be any different. But I don't think there's probably need to be too much different. One of the things that we'd like to get across is that we don't believe that we've got to reinvent the wheel. I think we've just got to hone it and make sure that we get it right. So in your bags you've got a breed type with weights, shapes, all different things that we believe that the breed needed, and that's what we've bred for. And I'm not saying that other people can't breed for that exact same thing and probably do a better job than we're doing, but I don't like the idea of trying to change this to be in one area someone saying, oh, I needed this big to walk the long distances, and in another area smaller sheep and have all different types. We're back to licorice, all sorts. So to be a recognised breed, and this breed is being recognised all around the world. We haven't got people here from New Zealand, from Mongolia that are interested to learn about the breed. We would have had people here from China, but they couldn't get their visa quickly enough. Americans, where there's lambs being born now from embryo transfer, they would have been here except they're lambing right at this moment. So a lot of interest in Mexico, all over the place. So it's a breed that can move around the world and tick the boxes in different places. So I don't think we've got to change it too much. We've had others that are far more experts than ourselves tell us that all we need to do is make this breed lamb at 200% every time they lamb, and then you've got it perfect. If you're lambing at 200%, you'll cause other problems. You'll burn out too quickly. You won't be getting a lamb every 8 months if you want to do that. So we think sensible is about 140 or 50%, and don't push the boundaries on it or you'll wreck something else. So you normally find those sheep that are having twins are the harder ones to get to join in that 8 month period. So there's plenty of people, and some that'll be talking tomorrow, that are doing pretty big percentages lambing every 8 months. So we're not pushing. We go into field days against other breeds, and they hold a flag up and say, oh, we do 200, 250. One breed suggested they did 300%, and we had some people from the UAE came out, and they were going to buy those sheep at 300% lambing because it was going to save everything in the UAE. They were doing it all in sheds and it was all going to be perfect. And they said, what do you think? I went into the computer and printed out that particular breed's own statistics where they scanned it 268%, but they lambed at 160. And I said, well, you've got a problem there because the lambs just die. And that was a Barula germ problem where you're getting multiple lambs and them dying. So what we're seeing with this breed, and we scan everything, is what you scan is nearly what you get in lambs. You don't get many that don't live, and most of the other breeds are not getting that. So you push it 200%, and then you'll have a lot of dead lambs. So. Murray.
So Graham, on that note, if you were to try and land them approximately 3 times in 2 years, what percentage would land 3 times in 2 years, and would you expect possibly a drop of, say, 1.3 per year?
Right. Well, what'll happen is, even though an animal is polyestrous, they're not going to come into season as well when it's out of season. They won't have as many lambs when it's adjoining out of season. So, for example, if you're on a composite sheep, you don't even try and join out of season. There is no out of season lamb. Am I right in New Zealand that your abattoirs run for 7 months a year? Is that it, 7 or 8?
Yeah, no, they don't feed leave lamb out of season. The poles also will, but...
Yeah, right. So this is the polyestrous thing. So that's giving us income all year round, but in the peak of the season, and the peak is say February, March, April for joining. It's not October, November. So you'll get a less lambing percentage then than you will in the peak time. That it's always going to be a high percentage of lambing. So it depends on climatic conditions. We've seen in Australia over the last 12 months that there's plenty of people where there's lambing percentages zip, nothing, because the sheep just weren't cycling because of the conditions. So that will vary greatly, and probably there are people here that would know more on that. I think Kelly's tried some out of season, and you're not doing that anymore. No. So there's one big operation that's not doing it out of season. Then we've got the snake. Sorry, the mouse man. He's going out of season in the smaller operation. It's working brilliantly. So when he rings me up to say, is it normal to get this many lambs out of this many ewes? And you say, no, it's not normal, but if you're doing it, it's good. So it will be a massive variation in that. But the one thing that it is doing is, even if you're not getting out of season, even if you're not getting many lambs, you're still getting some, and it still allows you to have extra income because of whatever joins as a bonus, because you still get them joined at the peak of the season next time anyway.
So, Murray, probably got clients that are doing that, and because of the sheep, like these sheep will have lamb in the middle of summer or the middle of winter or whenever, and we're sitting at clients, with scanning, and what they're doing is they may not be exactly 3 lambs in 2 years, but because you don't have to, if it's a normal, whatever you call a normal breed of sheep, that you couldn't lamb them in December or whatever, like no one wants that, but if that's when it actually has to work in that cycle of the whole breeding of the sheep, it certainly works. So is it perfect that it's on a calendar that it says join here, take them out here, do that? That works for a start, and then it actually gets a little bit out of whack. It can, Steve's going to talk tomorrow about this, and he does it exceptionally well on a smaller operation, not a little operation, but a smaller operation. But we do have some big clients who go, right, it's all too hard. So they just go 1 lamb in a year, they're happy with what they get, and that's what they do. But one of the things that's going to come out of this breeding, probably everyone here knows it, is that these sheep are highly productive. They just keep breeding, and in no time at all, you've got surplus ewes, or you've got more ewes, or whatever you're doing, simply because, as Graham said, even if you don't get them all to go in lamb, with scanning it's so simple to go, right, if we've got those in lamb, we catch the lot next time around. It's not as if just because they missed out that time, they definitely go back in lamb for the next go.
So to one of the issues I did mention when I was talking earlier is we were concerned about them being polyestrous, and having Texel in there is like it just kills it. So how did we overcome that? We flushed out of season. So if they don't flush out of season, then they don't have any progeny and they're not part of the breed. So that was the way to fix that. Now, if you were just working on Texels, you'd find an odd one that would breed out of season, and over many, many generations you would improve it. But with what we were doing, if they didn't flush well out of season, well, you weren't going to flush them the next time because they wouldn't give you any animals, and if they didn't produce any animals, they weren't part of the next 10% of the next generation that we selected through. So they're the sort of things that the embryo transfers has fixed that. If we'd have just used massive populations, we wouldn't have addressed that issue. Yeah. So that's been a big issue, is the embryo transfer actually kept the polyestrous side in there. And giving you an example, polyestrous, you mentioned that the Dorset around the world now is not as polyestrous as it used to be, because so many other broods have been crossed in that aren't polyestrous that they've lost it. And a good example, we injected New Zealand Pole Dorsets into one of our studs, and we could not get them to join in for an April lamb. We gave up, even with synchronising, they just wouldn't join, because they had a component of Border Leicester in them, and we knew it, we could see it. It wasn't in the pedigree, but it was in there because you could see it. But the Border Leicester influence in there killed them joining for an April lamb. Now they would join in other areas that are lower altitude, they would still join. But you come to 1200 metres here and it doesn't join. We could move our sheep that are not cycling here in a Pole Dorset down 200 metres lower than here, and they'd cycle in a week. So that's the sort of thing that can affect that side of it. So we actually sell Pole Dorset genetics around the world now because they actually breed out of season, they're still polyestrous, where a lot of the others aren't. So America, they're not polyestrous, and that's their main use. In England, it's the same. To get an early lamb out of season was their advantage. They're not terminals, they're maternals in those countries.
We're trying to genetically modify the scald at the beginning. Because there's some sheep never get scald.
Well, you're very right. Well, I mentioned the scald. We're doing some heavy genetic selection on it. Heavy. So the first thing we did is we went in with John Hickford from Lincoln University. There is a test for foot rot, for virulent foot rot. We tested our Australian whites for it, and they give them a score 1 to 5 for each parent. So it'll be a 1-1 or a 1-5 or a 2-3 or whatever it could be. That's a genetic DNA test on it. It's about 70% accurate. So if you keep testing for this and you keep doing it over a long time, 70% on 70% on 70%, and eventually you get something that will be very unlikely to get foot rot. So I went on to farms in New Zealand that had been doing this for 5 or 6 generations and they had no foot rot, but they never cleared the foot rot up. The sheep don't get it. So in the very first testing we did, we had a 1-1 score. And he said, I can't believe it. Like, there's other breeds that have gone and they can't get 1-1s. Only problem is that ram scalded. Right, so our genetic test, and John Hickford, who's a good friend, said, Graham, you'll fix it before we'll find out where the genetic side of it is, because benign foot rot and virulent foot rot are two totally different organisms. So our genetic test was simple. Ross and myself mainly, with a pair of secateurs and tipping them over, and if it scalded, we didn't flush it. And the pressure that, if you want to put pressure on scald, the ram portion that we're using, we're standing around feeders, and you'll probably see some of those feeders sitting around. They've got a roof, they've got a silage in there, and the silage falls out on the ground. The dews of the morning run out and into the silage, and it's like standing in a hot cup of tea, which is perfect conditions for scald. Scald will normally hit on front feet before hind feet, and I think we might have had one ram this year that might have scalded out of the 30 or 40 that are running around in those conditions, so you wouldn't use that ram no matter what, and that's what we stopped doing. So like we stopped, there was a photo earlier of a group of young rams. I said that's where 65 came out of 52, 16. There was one of the rams in that, the most superior ram phenotypically was never used, or was used only lightly, because when we let him out to run him up to the shed, he used to do laps of the whole area. He just went off his tree and all the others would follow him. But we didn't use him because of temperament. So if you don't use it because of temperament, you get better temperament in your brood. Same thing on the scald. We're not seeing scald. We've still got some scald here in our sheep, but it's mainly in Dorsets. Very unusual to see it in an Australian white now, where 5 years ago it was unusual not to see it.
So you culled the ewe and the ram?
Well, we wouldn't use a ram that had it, and the ewes that scalded weren't used either. They were initially, because we had to work on the best sheep. So you'll see some of that later on in this mix. We had to do it because beggars couldn't be choosers. If we ruled everything out on feet, we're ruling most of the sheep out.
interesting on that, in that we got a commercial producer, the bloke that's produced the wheat that we're going to eat tonight, and he used to run some first cross years as he's building up his Aussie White numbers. Now doesn't run any first cross years, just runs Aussie White, because in 2016 we were seriously wet at tomorrow where we had 30 something inches of rain, we normally have 22. The Aussie White sheep did not get scolded, they got minimal amount of scold compared to the first cross ewe, and generally the first cross ewe is the benchmark because of the black feet and all that sort of thing. But with feet, you know, black feet and things like that, we certainly have seen, from a commercial point of view, we've seen them. As I said, they don't run any first cross ewes more than they run all Aussie Whites.
Well, I did notice with this ram that he never got scolded. None of his offspring ever got scolded.
Well,
And so
we've got one stud breeder that's been selecting on that for a good while, because he lives in an area where it's wetter, and I think we're making progress. Yeah, we're definitely making progress on that. And Blackfeet versus Whitefoot doesn't have any effect on schooling, none whatsoever. The difference is when the Blackfoot scalds, if it's the right shape, it doesn't grow as long. That's about the only difference. There are plenty of people with both Dorpers and a few with Australian Whites that have been diagnosed with foot rot when they haven't had it. The desert foot is a soft foot and it underruns the heel. So it looks like foot rot, and I've seen them if the fly, and it gets smelly, stinky, and then the flies get in it and they'll eat it, but it self-repairs, it never falls off. Foot rot, the feet fall off. And the old, I've never seen foot rot, only in photographs, but scald and foot rot, if it's not treated, can be similar. We had some sheep that went into a school in Orange, and the woman rang up and said, I've been diagnosed with foot rot with the few sheep they'd bought, and they were running them in a small amount of grass where they were also running cattle. So the scald bug comes from cattle, and if you run a dairy or a feedlot, they know all about scald, but the normal farmers don't that run cattle because they run an open, expanse country. I said, no, you haven't got foot rot. No, it's been diagnosed with foot rot. And I said, yeah, so, okay, well, have they tested for it? Oh, yeah, well, they're going to test now. They tested this bloody here for 6 months, and she had 1 foot that had got fly blown, and he guaranteed it was. And 6 months later, oh, I'm sorry, you haven't got it. You've got, and they were going to slaughter everything, but I know of farms that have been destocked because of it. It's untreated. It's like worms. If you want to breed a sheep that's worm resistant, well, you go ahead and you're going to lose a lot of sheep finding those worm resistant ones. There may be at some stage, I don't doubt, there'll be a DNA test that will identify that for us, and then we can move in that direction. Doesn't exist yet, but there may be at some stage something that does it. A bit like if you're breeding Wagyu cattle and there's a DNA test on eating quality for certain traits in a Wagyu, it's pointless testing a Hereford for it because it doesn't have it. Might be a way of making money out of the test, but it won't have it. So it's the same thing with foot scald, foot rot. They have identified, so they went around and selected 7 different breeds, I think it was, around the world that didn't react to foot rot, and then they started to look into the DNA markers on what common alleles were in those sheep, and that's how they did it. But scald, nothing. So scald, pneumonia are 2 things that they are susceptible to. So what we do is tell people that the issue's there, beware of it. We suggest on scald that if you're having issues with it, use formalin, not zinc sulphate. It's a waste of time. Copper sulphate works really well, but you end up with a lot of green sheep. And formalin is a carcinogenic, and the reason that the departments are saying zinc rather than formalin is if you've got foot rot, formalin hardens the foot and holds the bug in it. But all you're wanting the formalin to do in scald is just dry that in between the toes out, just dry it out and it'll clear up. So through selection, I think we've made. I was concerned at one stage that we might not be able to get that right. John Hickford was right. Through selection, on phenotype and putting pressure on, I think we've got that one under control. We good?
Ready for lunch?
Good.